Iran's strikes against Israel were unprecedented. A barrage of drones and missiles, the first time Iran has attacked Israel directly from Iranian territory. Israel says most were intercepted and there was little damage. Still, it's an alarming escalation. Israel and Iran's decades-long shadow war spilling out into the open.
There's always been a sort of sense of rules of engagement between Iran and Israel, that they were locked in a very violent confrontation, but it seemed to be understood by both leaderships that there needed to be a level of restraint that avoided bringing the countries to the brink of a direct conflict.
Iran says its attack was in response to this, an Israeli strike on Iran's consulate in Syria's capital, Damascus, earlier this month. Top Iranian military commanders were among those killed. For Iran, the attack was a red line. Attacking our consulate is like attacking our soil, said Iran's supreme leader.
Until this day, there has not been a normalization of a direct engagement between the two militaries. Now we've crossed that threshold. We are in for a much more dangerous situation between these two countries.
Israel and Iran were once allies, but ties were severed after Iran's Islamic Revolution in 1979. In the decades since, Israel and Iran have become bitter enemies. Their shadow war has largely been fought through Iran's proxies. A self-described axis of resistance, including Hezbollah in Lebanon to Israel's north, regularly exchanging fire with the Israeli military. Iran also backs the Houthi rebels in Yemen, responsible for shipping attacks in the Red Sea, and the Hamas militants behind the October 7th attacks in Israel.
It was often through these proxies that Iran struck out, causing tremendous casualties over many years. This has kept Iran a step removed from responsibility for the militancy and violence that it has invested in around the region.
While Iran relies on proxies, it accuses Israel of carrying out covert attacks inside Iran. In November 2020, Iran's top nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was killed in a car near Tehran. For years, Israel claimed he was leading Iran's efforts to build a nuclear bomb.
Remember that name, Fakhrizadeh.
Fakhrizadeh's assassination and others linked to Israel, but never officially claimed.
The constant back and forth, the regular backing of attacks on Israel and Israel's assassination campaign did make some sort of escalation at least possible, and for many years.
Tensions between Israel, Iran, and its proxies have been dangerously high since the October 7th Hamas attacks. In December, Iran accused Israel of killing a top general said to oversee arms shipments to Hezbollah in a strike near Damascus. A month later, an explosion in Beirut killed a top Hamas leader. Hezbollah then stepped up its attacks against Israel, with Israel retaliating. All that friction leading to Israel's strike on Iran's consulate in Syria. And Iran's retaliatory attack on Israel. Does this war now go back into the shadows, or does much worse loom?
This would be the first time in which we might see the possibility of a war, and it is very possible that a war between the two countries could draw in the United States.
I think the Iranians were trying to send a signal that, yes, they wanted to strike back, but also they weren't interested in an all-out conflict. But when you signal using military force, it's easy for people to misunderstand, and it's easy for mistakes to be made.
So lots of concern about what could happen next between Iran and Israel, and we have two experts to address that for us this evening. Janice Stein is the director of the Munk School of Global Affairs, and Javed Ali has worked extensively with the FBI and U.S. Homeland Security. Janice, we knew this attack was coming. Israel and its allies thwarted most of the missiles. So what was the real impact here?
Oh, it was considerable first of all, it exploded Israel's misconception that Iran would not attack directly, even if its top generals were killed. The other impact, and this is not what Iran wanted, it repaired that breach between Biden and Netanyahu. That was really at a boil. I think Iran miscalculated. I think the timing was off from a broader perspective.
Javed, what do you make of the defense that Israel and its allies was able to mount here?
Well, unlike October 7th, Ian, this attack was detected as early as last Thursday and Friday based on media reporting about intelligence indicators of these preparations for ballistic missile attacks, cruise missile attacks, drone attacks. So the good news is the intelligence community and enterprise was kind of firing on all cylinders and caught the early signs of this. And then it gave Israel and the U.S. and a coalition of partners in the region, that time to prepare and sort of activate this multi-layered system that then, for the most part, knocked down or intercepted almost every single weapon that was fired against Israel. I think a couple landed in the Negev desert and hit close to an Israeli military base, but thankfully no casualties, no large-scale physical destruction.
Just to add to that, too, and I agree with Javed, just to add to that, this was really, in some sense, an astonishing technical performance. 4 air forces, 3 different missile systems, with, and the easiest way to describe this, not a single controller. It was technically an astonishing story, really.
So the big question tonight, actually it's been the big question since this attack began, and I'll ask each of you this, and Janice, let me begin with you. How do you anticipate Israel will respond?
There was a tough conversation with President Biden in which he made it clear that he thinks no response is necessary. In the message Iran hoped to send is not the message that Tel Aviv gets. This continues this pattern of miscalculation. They see this as a significant escalation. It is the first large-scale missile attack on Israel's territory. It's almost inconceivable that there will not be a response, but it may take several days or longer to come because they have a wide range of options. But I think a response is coming, which is, again, not what Iran hoped for.
It is almost inconceivable that Israel will not respond, Janice, is
Yes.
how you characterize it.
Yes.
Javed, what do you think of that?
What I think is really fascinating about what's happened is that 2 thresholds have been crossed. Israel's attack against the IRGC Quds Force officers in Damascus going back a couple weeks ago, and the number of officers that were killed, including 2 generals, that's the biggest physical attack Israel has launched against the Quds Force that we know of, in this decades-long shadow war between Iran and Israel. And now on the flip side, as Janice has said, Iran has managed to launch a combination of 300 different types of weapons at Israel, even though they didn't achieve their sort of tactical objectives. So with these sort of the war in the shadows now coming out more directly, for both countries, it could further escalate in that direction, or it could go back to the shadow war arena. And that's sort of the bottom line that I assess in this most recent piece, is that my assessment, having looked at the Quds Force in Iran for decades now, is that I do think it'll recede back into the shadows unless, as Janice hinted at, that Israel responds and escalates. And if that happens, then all bets are off on how Iran will respond to that.
Yeah, Janice, just 45 seconds left, but President Biden has made it clear he does not want to see an escalation here. Do you think there's a chance that especially the United States could manage to persuade Israel not to respond?
I think it's a low probability. The United States has actually sent messages to both sides. It sent a message to Iran 48 hours ago that its attack had to be within limits. It's going to be very tough for that same president to say to the war cabinet in Israel, well, you can't respond within limits. So I think what we're going to see is a negotiation between the two about what is going to happen. Biden has made clear the United States will not get involved. But I think there is already a decision to respond, but an openness to consider a large range of options across the spectrum.
I so appreciate the expertise both of you bring to this. Thank you very much.